Last night was supposed to be a celebration, my 40th birthday. My wife, Rachel, insisted on throwing me a lavish party at our home. She said it was her way of showing how much she appreciated me. There were streamers, champagne towers, and every important person in our lives, from family to colleagues. But amid the glittering decor and cheerful chatter, I noticed something off. Rachel looked stunning, as always. Dressed in an emerald green gown that hugged her figure perfectly, she worked the room effortlessly. She laughed, she toasted, and she made sure everyone felt welcome. But her attention kept diverting to one person, Jason, my best friend of 20 years. At first, I thought it was harmless. They've always been friendly. Jason's always been charming, the kind of guy who lights up a room without trying. But then, the small signs started piling up. I caught a lingering glance between them as she handed him a drink. Later, I noticed her leaning in too close while they exchanged a joke, her fingers brushing against his arm. It was subtle enough that no one else seemed to notice, but I couldn't ignore it. Rachel seemed nervous every time I approached them. She'd laugh louder, deflect the conversation to someone else, or conveniently excuse herself to check on the catering. Jason, on the other hand, grew quieter whenever I was near. He avoided meeting my gaze, a stark contrast to his usual boisterous personality. My suspicions simmered as the evening went on. I tried to shake them off, but the doubt gnawed at me. Was I imagining things? Paranoia fueled by the stress of the day? Or was there something sinister lurking beneath the surface of this perfect night? I decided to play it cool. I mingled with the guests, plastering a smile on my face, but my eyes kept darting back to Rachel and Jason. When I saw them slip into the kitchen together, I excused myself and followed quietly. I didn't interrupt, I just stood outside the door and listened. Their voices were hushed, but I caught snippets. "Relax," Rachel said. "He doesn't suspect anything." Jason's reply was too muffled to hear, but her words alone sent a chill down my spine. It was all I needed to confirm that this wasn't in my head. Something was going on between my wife and my best friend. I didn't confront them, not yet. This wasn't the time or place. I needed evidence. Something solid to expose their betrayal for what it was. For now, I'd let the party continue. I toasted with friends, blew out the candles on my cake, and smiled for the photos. But inside, I was already planning my next move. After the party ended, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Rachel had fallen asleep beside me, her breathing even and calm, as if she didn't have a care in the world. My mind, however, was racing. I replayed every glance, every whispered word, every awkward laugh between her and Jason. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was certainty. I needed proof. The next morning, while Rachel was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Her lock screen password was easy to guess: our anniversary. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, but I didn't find anything incriminating at first. Then I checked her hidden photo folder. There it was, a series of selfies with Jason, each one more damning than the last. In one, his hand rested on her shoulder, a little too comfortably. In another, they were at a bar I didn't recognize, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. I emailed the photos to myself and deleted any evidence that I'd been snooping. My stomach churned as I opened our shared cloud account next, a space we use for backing up photos and important documents. I didn't expect to find anything, but I was wrong. Tucked away in a folder labeled Work Docs, I found screenshots of their messages. They were careful with their words. No outright confessions of love or passion, but the tone was undeniable. "Jason, last night was incredible. You always know how to make me smile. Rachel, just promise me you'll keep this between us. I don't want him getting hurt." Hurt? I clenched my jaw. Hurt didn't even begin to cover how I was feeling. My wife and my best friend were having an affair, and they were trying to protect me from finding out? The audacity made my blood boil. I spent the rest of the day gathering more evidence. I dug into our shared accounts, her calendar, and even the guest list from the party. Jason had RSVP'd weeks in advance. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment betrayal, it was calculated. By the time Rachel came home that evening, I had a file full of screenshots, photos, and timestamps. I knew I couldn't confront them yet. I needed a stage big enough to expose them for who they really were. And what better stage than the people they'd lied to? A plan began to form in my mind. It was bold, ruthless, and would leave no room for them to escape the truth. But first, I needed to ensure my facts were airtight. I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. Rachel remained her usual self, cheerful, affectionate, and completely unaware that I was onto her. Jason even called me once to catch up, his voice as smooth and confident as ever. I played along, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat every time he laughed. But inside, I was a volcano, ready to erupt. I needed a stage. A place where their lies could unravel in front of everyone. And I had the perfect opportunity, a dinner party we had planned for the following Saturday, a follow-up to my birthday bash. Rachel had insisted we invite our closest friends and family, including Jason. She thought it would be a nice way to keep the good vibes going. Little did she know, this would be the night she and Jason would lose everything. I spent the week preparing. I compiled the evidence, screenshots of messages, photos from the cloud, and even emails between them that I'd uncovered from her laptop. The final piece of my plan was an email I drafted, addressed to every single person on the dinner guest list. The subject line was simple: the truth about Rachel and Jason. The message itself was brief, but the attachments said it all. Every photo, every text, every timestamp, I left no room for interpretation. Once I hit send, there would be no taking it back. The evening arrived, and I made sure everything was perfect. The house was spotless, the table set, and the wine flowing. Guests trickled in, laughing and chatting as if nothing was amiss. Rachel flitted around the room, the perfect hostess, her laugh carrying above the hum of conversation. Jason arrived late, as usual, flashing me a grin and clapping me on the shoulder like we were still the best of friends. It took everything in me not to punch him right there. I waited until dinner was served and everyone was seated. Rachel raised her glass for a toast, her eyes sparkling. To love, friendship, and the beautiful moments we share, she said, her voice dripping with sincerity. Oh, the irony. As everyone sipped their wine, I stood. I'd like to add something to that, I said, my voice steady but cold. Rachel's smile faltered slightly, and Jason froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. To honesty. Because without it, love and friendship are nothing but illusions. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me. I've been doing some reflecting this week, I continued, pulling my phone from my pocket. And I realized that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us. Rachel's face paled. Jason looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Perfect. Rachel, Jason, I said, my voice sharp. Would you like to explain these? I tapped a button, and the TV on the wall lit up. The screen filled with the photos and screenshots I'd uncovered, one after another, flashing like a slideshow of betrayal. Gasps filled the room. Rachel's friends covered their mouths in shock. My mother stood up, horrified. Jason's wife, who had been sitting across from him, burst into tears. Rachel shot to her feet, her voice high-pitched and defensive. Nick, this isn't what it looks like. Oh, really? I said, crossing my arms. Because it looks like you've been screwing my best friend behind my back. Jason stammered, his usual smoothness replaced with sheer panic. Nick, listen, man, I can explain. Explain? I barked, cutting him off. Explain how you looked me in the eye for months, pretending to be my friend, while you slept with my wife? Rachel started crying big, dramatic sobs. Nick, please, I was lonely. You were always busy with work. I didn't feel loved. Save it, I snapped. You think loneliness justifies this? You think blaming me makes you the victim here? Jason tried to step in, but I turned on him. And you? You're a coward. You've been riding my coattails for years, and now you think you can take what's mine? You disgust me. The room was chaos now, shouting, crying, guests trying to process what they'd just seen. I could feel the weight of their judgment falling squarely on Rachel and Jason, and I reveled in it. I hope you two are happy together, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Because after tonight, you're both out of my life. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them to deal with the wreckage they'd caused. But before I left, I hit send on the email. The truth was out there now, for everyone to see. The aftermath of the dinner party was even more explosive than I had imagined. The email I sent out reached every corner of our social circle within minutes. By the time I got home that night, my phone was flooded with messages, some from friends expressing their shock and support, others just in disbelief at what they'd learned. As for Rachel and Jason, their lives were already unraveling. Rachel came home around midnight, mascara streaked down her face and tears streaming. I was sitting in the living room, sipping a scotch and staring into the fireplace. She dropped her purse on the floor, fell to her knees, and began begging. "Nick, please," she sobbed. "I was stupid. I made a mistake. Don't throw everything away. We can fix this." I didn't respond. I let her words hang in the air, meaningless echoes of a woman who'd already destroyed everything. "I was lonely, Nick," she continued. "You were always working late. I didn't feel seen. Jason was there, and it just happened." I finally spoke, my voice low and even. "It didn't just happen, Rachel. Affairs don't just happen. They're choices, calculated, deliberate choices. And you made them over and over again." Her sobs grew louder. "But I love you," she cried. "I love us. It was a mistake, but I never stopped loving you." I shook my head, standing up. "You don't love me. You love what I provide. You love being the center of attention. You love yourself, Rachel, and that's it." Jason didn't fare much better. From what I heard through mutual friends, his wife, Lisa, kicked him out that same night. By morning, she'd already spoken to a lawyer. Jason tried calling me repeatedly, but I let every call go to voicemail. Eventually, he texted, "Nick, man, I know I messed up. Please let me explain. Don't throw away 20 years of friendship over this." Friendship? I laughed bitterly at the word. Jason had thrown away everything the moment he crossed that line. I ignored him, just as I had ignored Rachel's pleas. The next few days were a whirlwind of gossip and fallout. Rachel's social media was flooded with comments, most of them scathing. "How could you?" and "disgusting" were among the kinder ones. Jason wasn't spared either. Friends, colleagues, even strangers shared their disgust. But the real nail in the coffin came when our boss, a mutual connection Jason and I shared, caught wind of the affair. Jason was removed from a major project and quietly reassigned to a less visible role. His career was effectively stalled. Rachel tried one last time to salvage things. She cornered me in the kitchen 2 nights later, her voice steady now, her manipulative streak back in full force. "Nick, if you divorce me, it'll ruin me," she said, her tone cold and calculated. "Do you really want that on your conscience?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "You ruined yourself, Rachel. And no, I won't feel guilty for doing what's best for me." Her mask cracked for a moment, desperation flashing in her eyes. "I'll fight you, Nick. For everything." I smirked. "Good luck with that. The house is in my name. The accounts are separate. And oh," I leaned in, my voice dropping, "don't forget about the prenup." Her face went pale. She had forgotten. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my house, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and sadness still lingered, but there was something else now: freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't tethered to someone who didn't value me. I wasn't living a lie. Rachel and Jason had been exposed for who they really were, and I was still standing. Stronger, wiser, and ready to rebuild. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The divorce papers were filed within a week of the dinner party. Rachel didn't try to contest them. She knew she had no leverage. I offered her nothing more than the minimum the prenup required, and even that felt like too much. She moved out of the house, taking her tears, her excuses, and the last remnants of her deceit with her. Jason was gone, too. His wife, Lisa, finalized their divorce faster than I thought possible. Word spread through our social circle about how he was couch surfing, his charm and smooth talking failing to find him a permanent place to land. No one wanted to be associated with the guy who stabbed his best friend in the back. For me, the emptiness of the house was both a relief and a challenge. The silence that followed the chaos was deafening at first, but I slowly began to find peace in it. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was my sanctuary, a place to rebuild myself. For the first time in years, I had the freedom to focus on me. I threw myself into the gym, not out of spite but because I needed an outlet for the anger and hurt that still simmered beneath the surface. Every mile on the treadmill, every weight lifted, felt like another step toward reclaiming my strength. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, people who had quietly distanced themselves because they couldn't stand Rachel's manipulative charm. They welcomed me back with open arms, their support a reminder that I wasn't alone. Therapy became part of my routine too. At first I was hesitant. What could talking about my pain possibly solve? But it helped. It helped me process the betrayal, the self-doubt, and the anger. It helped me see that the betrayal wasn't about me. It was about their flaws, their selfishness. And most importantly, it helped me forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. One afternoon, about 2 months after the dinner party, I was grabbing coffee at a small cafe downtown. It was a quiet spot, nothing fancy, but it had become one of my regular haunts. I was flipping through emails on my phone when a voice interrupted me. "Nick? Is that you?" I looked up to see Emily, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She was the kind of person whose laughter could light up a room, and seeing her was like a breath of fresh air. We spent hours catching up. She'd been through her own messy divorce years ago and shared her story with a mix of humor and hard-earned wisdom. For the first time in a long while, I felt a connection, not forced, not complicated, but real. Emily and I started spending more time together. We weren't rushing into anything. It wasn't about filling a void or proving something to anyone. It was about two people who had been through hell finding solace in each other's company. Meanwhile, my career flourished. Without the weight of Rachel's constant demands, I found new focus and energy. I landed a major promotion, one that had been in the works for years but always seemed just out of reach. I even took up a new hobby, photography. It was something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. Capturing moments, framing them in a way that told a story, it felt cathartic, almost poetic. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there was beauty to be found. One day, Rachel called. It was the first time I'd heard from her in months. Her voice was soft, almost timid, a stark contrast to the confident, manipulative woman I'd once known. "Nick, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said. "For everything. I know I hurt you." I didn't feel anger anymore. Just pity. "Rachel, I've moved on," I replied. "I hope you can, too." She sighed, and I could hear the weight of her regret. "I'll always regret what I did to us," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Goodbye, Rachel." And that was it. No more tears, no more drama. Just closure. As I sit here writing this, I'm not the man I was a few months ago. I'm stronger, wiser, and happier than I ever thought possible. Betrayal may have broken me, but it didn't destroy me. It was the spark that ignited a transformation I didn't know I needed. To anyone reading this who's been through something similar, it gets better. The pain fades, the anger subsides, and eventually you find peace. And when you do, you'll realize that the life waiting on the other side is worth every struggle. Life, I've learned, doesn't stop to wait for you to pick up the pieces. It moves forward, dragging you with it, whether you're ready or not. But instead of being a passive passenger, I decided to grab the reins. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. After years of living in Rachel's shadow, I started rediscovering who I really was. I dove headfirst into things that brought me joy, things I'd forgotten about. I picked up an old guitar that had been collecting dust in the basement, and spent hours relearning chords and melodies. Music became my therapy, each note a release from the tension that had weighed on me for so long. Photography, too, became a source of solace. One weekend, I drove out to the countryside with my camera, just me and the open road. I captured sunrises, rolling hills, and quiet moments that reminded me there was still beauty in the world. Every click of the shutter felt like a small victory, a step further from the chaos Rachel and Jason had left behind. Emily and I continued to grow closer. There was no pressure, no rush, just an easy, genuine connection. She understood the weight of betrayal and the long road to healing because she'd walked it herself. Her presence in my life wasn't about fixing me. It was about reminding me that I wasn't broken in the first place. One night, after dinner, we sat on her porch, sipping wine and watching the stars. She turned to me, her eyes soft but serious. "You're not the same person I used to know, Nick. And that's a good thing." I smiled. "Neither are you." For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in a long time: hope. As life moved on, so did the rumors about Rachel and Jason. Their affair had burned bright but brief, imploding under the weight of public scrutiny and their own guilt. I heard through the grapevine that Jason had tried rekindling things with Lisa, but she slammed the door in his face, literally. Rachel wasn't doing much better. She'd moved in with her sister, who, according to mutual friends, was getting tired of her freeloading ways. The woman who once prided herself on her charm and control was now a shadow of her former self, desperately trying to rebuild a life she had so carelessly destroyed. One day, I got an unexpected email from Jason. The subject line read, "An apology if you'll hear it." I hesitated but opened it anyway. The message was long, full of excuses disguised as regrets. He admitted to everything, blamed his weakness, and begged for forgiveness. I didn't respond. Some apologies don't deserve an audience. The most surprising part of this journey wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the strength I discovered within myself. I stopped second-guessing my worth or my decisions. Therapy had taught me to let go of the need for closure from Rachel or Jason. They didn't define me. I did. I took on new challenges at work, landing a major promotion that gave me the freedom to travel. Seeing the world became another form of healing. I visited places I'd only dreamed of: New York City's bustling streets, the serene beaches of Maui, the historic charm of Charleston. Each trip felt like another piece of my soul falling back into place. Months later, I ran into Rachel at a local cafe. She looked worn, as if life had taken its toll. She saw me and froze, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and shame. "Nick," she said softly, as if testing whether she was allowed to speak. I nodded politely but didn't offer more. "I've been meaning to reach out," she began, her voice trembling. "To say I'm sorry. Truly." I didn't need her apology, but I let her speak. Maybe she needed the closure this time. "I made a mess of everything," she said, tears welling up. "And I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I realize now how much I ruined." I met her gaze, calm and steady. "Rachel, I've already forgiven you. Not for you, but for me. I moved on a long time ago." Her face crumpled, and she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered before walking away. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a quiet sense of finality. It was over. Really over. Part 6. Thriving in the Aftermath. Life, I've learned, doesn't stop to wait for you to pick up the pieces. It moves forward, dragging you with it, whether you're ready or not. But instead of being a passive passenger, I decided to grab the reins. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Reclaiming my identity. After years of living in Rachel's shadow, I started rediscovering who I really was. I dove headfirst into things that brought me joy, things I'd forgotten about. I picked up an old guitar that had been collecting dust in the basement, and spent hours relearning chords and melodies. Music became my therapy, each note a release from the tension that had weighed on me for so long. Photography, too, became a source of solace. One weekend, I drove out to the countryside with my camera, just me and the open road. I captured sunrises, rolling hills, and quiet moments that reminded me there was still beauty in the world. Every click of the shutter felt like a small victory, a step further from the chaos Rachel and Jason had left behind. New beginnings. Emily and I continued to grow closer. There was no pressure, no rush, just an easy, genuine connection. She understood the weight of betrayal and the long road to healing because she'd walked it herself. Her presence in my life wasn't about fixing me. It was about reminding me that I wasn't broken in the first place. One night, after dinner, we sat on her porch, sipping wine and watching the stars. She turned to me, her eyes soft but serious. "You're not the same person I used to know, Nick. And that's a good thing." I smiled. "Neither are you." For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in a long time: hope. A moment of karma. As life moved on, so did the rumors about Rachel and Jason. Their affair had burned bright but brief, imploding under the weight of public scrutiny and their own guilt. I heard through the grapevine that Jason had tried rekindling things with Lisa, but she slammed the door in his face, literally. Rachel wasn't doing much better. She'd moved in with her sister, who, according to mutual friends, was getting tired of her freeloading ways. The woman who once prided herself on her charm and control was now a shadow of her former self, desperately trying to rebuild the life she had so carelessly destroyed. One day, I got an unexpected email from Jason. The subject line read, "An apology if you'll hear it." I hesitated but opened it anyway. The message was long, full of excuses disguised as regrets. He admitted to everything, blamed his weakness, and begged for forgiveness. I didn't respond. Some apologies don't deserve an audience. Finding my strength. The most surprising part of this journey wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the strength I discovered within myself. I stopped second-guessing my worth or my decisions. Therapy had taught me to let go of the need for closure from Rachel or Jason. They didn't define me. I did. I took on new challenges at work, landing a major promotion that gave me the freedom to travel. Seeing the world became another form of healing. I visited places I'd only dreamed of: New York City's bustling streets, the serene beaches of Maui, the historic charm of Charleston. Each trip felt like another piece of my soul falling back into place. The last goodbye. Months later, I ran into Rachel at a local cafe. She looked worn, as if life had taken its toll. She saw me and froze, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and shame. "Nick," she said softly, as if testing whether she was allowed to speak. I nodded politely but didn't offer more. "I've been meaning to reach out," she began, her voice trembling. "To say I'm sorry. Truly." I didn't need her apology, but I let her speak. Maybe she needed the closure this time. "I made a mess of everything," she said, tears welling up. "And I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I realize now how much I ruined." I met her gaze, calm and steady. "Rachel, I've already forgiven you. Not for you, but for me. I moved on a long time ago." Her face crumpled, and she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered before walking away. I watched her go, feeling nothing but a quiet sense of finality. It was over. Really over. A brighter future. Now, as I write this, I can see how far I've come. The man I was, the one who stayed quiet, ignored the red flags, and let others control his narrative, is gone. In his place stands someone stronger, someone who knows his worth and refuses to settle for less. Emily and I are planning a trip together, something spontaneous and exciting. Life feels open again, full of possibilities I never thought I'd have. Betrayal may have knocked me down, but it didn't keep me there. It pushed me to grow, to rise, and to reclaim my life. To anyone reading this, know that even the darkest storms eventually pass. The sun will shine again. And when it does, you'll be ready to embrace it. Months have passed since I last thought about Rachel and Jason. Their shadows no longer linger over my life, and the sting of betrayal has dulled into a distant memory. What surprises me most isn't just how much has changed, but how much better my life has become without them in it. Emily and I decided to take that trip. We packed our bags, turned off our phones, and spent 2 weeks exploring Italy. From the cobblestone streets of Rome to the rolling hills of Tuscany, every moment felt like a fresh chapter being written. One night, under the glow of fairy lights on a vineyard, Emily leaned over and said, "Do you realize how much lighter you seem now? You're not carrying the weight of the past anymore." She was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder or bracing for the next disaster. I was fully present, enjoying every laugh, every glass of wine, every sunrise. The trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a celebration of survival and growth. Returning home, I threw myself back into work with a newfound sense of purpose. The promotion I'd earned earlier had opened doors I never imagined. I spearheaded a major project that gained national recognition, and my team threw a party in my honor. It felt surreal, standing in a room full of people who respected and admired me. For so long, I had questioned my worth, thanks to Rachel's manipulative tendencies, but now I knew I was more than enough. One of my colleagues pulled me aside during the party and said, "You've got this energy about you, Nick. Like you're unstoppable." I smiled. For once, I believed it. While I was thriving, Rachel's life continued to spiral. Word reached me through mutual acquaintances that she tried rekindling relationships with old friends, but no one wanted to be caught in her web again. Jason had moved out of town, leaving her completely isolated. She'd burned every bridge, and now, she was living with the consequences. I didn't feel sorry for her. Sympathy requires respect, and she had lost mine the moment she betrayed me. Still, I wished her no harm, just a life far away from mine. Jason wasn't faring much better. His attempts to rebuild his reputation fell flat when his affair with Rachel followed him like a bad odor. I heard he tried reaching out to Lisa again, but she had moved on, happily engaged to someone else. One afternoon, I received another email from him, titled simply, "Can we talk?" I didn't open it. There was nothing left to say. Emily and I continued to grow closer. What started as a slow-burning friendship turned into something I hadn't dared to hope for again: love. She wasn't just a partner, she was my equal, my confidant, and my reminder that life can be beautiful, even after it falls apart. One evening, as we walked along a quiet beach, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. My heart pounded not with fear, but with excitement. "Emily," I said, taking her hand. "You came into my life when I thought I'd lost everything. You helped me see that the best was still ahead of me. Will you marry me?" Her smile lit up the night, and tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, Nick. 1,000 times yes." As I write this now, I can't help but marvel at how life works. What once felt like the end of the world was actually the beginning of something far greater. Betrayal broke me, but it also shaped me into a stronger, wiser, and more resilient version of myself. Rachel and Jason are ghosts of a life I no longer live. They're cautionary tales, reminders of what I deserve and what I'll never tolerate again. The future isn't just bright, it's radiant, filled with love, growth, and endless possibilities. To anyone out there who feels like the pain will never end, it will. You'll heal, you'll grow, and you'll thrive. Life is waiting for you to embrace it. If you told me a year ago that I'd be writing this chapter of my life, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I was stuck in a whirlwind of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. But today, I'm living proof that even the most devastating storms can give way to clear skies. Emily and I didn't want a big, traditional wedding. Instead, we opted for something simple, intimate, and full of meaning. On a sunny afternoon, surrounded by a small group of close friends and family, we exchanged vows in a little garden overlooking the ocean. Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Nick, you've shown me what strength and resilience look like. You've reminded me that love isn't about perfection, it's about partnership, honesty, and finding joy even in the toughest times." I held her hands tightly as I made my own promise. Emily, you've given me a second chance at happiness. You've shown me that life's greatest chapters often come after its hardest trials. I vow to cherish you, to respect you, and to build a life with you filled with love and laughter. The rest of the day was a blur of laughter, music, and pure joy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. After the wedding, we decided to move to a new city, a fresh start in every sense of the word. It wasn't about running away from the past. It was about building a future together. Emily found a great job at a nonprofit she'd been passionate about for years, and I accepted an offer to lead a groundbreaking project at my company. Together, we created a home filled with love and mutual respect. It wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary, a place where we could truly be ourselves. Fate has a funny way of reminding you how far you've come. One evening, Emily and I were out for dinner when I spotted Rachel at a nearby table. She was sitting alone, stirring a drink, her gaze distant. She looked hollow, like someone carrying the weight of 1,000 regrets. Our eyes met briefly. She gave me a weak, almost apologetic smile. I nodded politely and turned back to Emily, who was laughing at something the waiter had said. In that moment, I realized how grateful I was for the pain, the betrayal, and everything that had led me to where I was now. Rachel was a chapter I'd closed. She was part of the story, but she no longer defined it. This journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every step. The betrayal I once thought would destroy me became the catalyst for a life I never dared to dream of. It taught me to value myself, to stand tall even when the ground beneath me crumbled. To anyone reading this who feels trapped in heartbreak, know this: you are stronger than you think. The pain will fade, the scars will heal, and one day, you'll look back and realize that it all shaped you into someone unstoppable. As I sit here next to Emily, her hand resting lightly on mine, I can't help but smile. This is my happily ever after, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And that's more than enough. Thank you for following my journey. If my story has resonated with you or given you hope, I'd love to hear from you. Remember, the best is yet to come. Always.